Good afternoon. Thank you all for coming. I'm proud to stand here with our conference chair, Elise Stefanik, and members of the Doctors Caucus to talk about the importance of us passing the Halt Fentanyl Act. This is a bill that has bipartisan support, but a bill that is critically important in our fight to stop the flow of this deadly drug and its synthetics into the United States. You know, every day in America, nearly 300 young people will die from fentanyl overdoses and other related drugs. Yesterday, nearly 300 young people died. Today, 300. Tomorrow, another 300. Imagine if an airplane fell out of the sky every single day in America and 300 people were on that plane. We wouldn't go till the end of this week before we shut down everything and said, we're going to figure out why this is happening and we're going to stop it. And yet President Biden knows why this is happening. It's happening because there's an open southern border where the Chinese are making this drug, they're sending it to Mexico, and they're bringing it into the United States in record numbers, killing over 100,000 young people last year. And again, 300 every day still dying, and this president refuses to take action. Well, this Congress is taking action. We're going to bring this bill to the floor on Thursday and pass it. I believe there'll be a strong bipartisan vote. But this is a bill that President Biden should be supporting from the beginning, but it's also an issue, fentanyl, in our country that President Biden should be confronting right now. He can do it on his own, just by securing the southern border and stopping the drug cartels from being able to have operational control to bring this deadly drug into our country. So we're going to continue to stand up for those families who are sick and tired of having their sons and daughters not wake up, never to wake up again because they took a pill and next thing you know, they're dead. They're dead. It's happening every day in every community in America, and it shouldn't be happening, and we're doing something about it. Now I'm happy to bring up our conference chair, Elise Stefanik.
Thank you to our Majority Leader, and of course, thank you to my colleagues who serve in the House Republican Docs Caucus. The American people know that President Biden and far-left Democrats' policies created a catastrophic border crisis that has allowed fentanyl to pour into our communities across this nation in record amounts. Hundreds of Americans are killed daily by this illicit drug, devastating our communities. Fentanyl is the leading cause of death among young Americans aged 18 to 49, surpassing cancer, heart disease, and car accidents. In 2022, over 109,000 people died of drug overdoses, roughly 75,000 of whom died from synthetic opioids, largely illicit fentanyl or fentanyl-related substances. When we talk about every district and every community in this country being a border district and border community, look no further than my district this past weekend in rural upstate New York, Rensselaer County, just one of 15 rural counties in my district. There were 5 illicit fentanyl poisoning deaths just this weekend. 5 families who lost loved ones. 5 families who will forever be grieving. To address this crisis, House Republicans are taking action. We're voting on the Halt Fentanyl Act, which my colleagues have worked so hard to shape and bring to the floor. And as I said, I'm honored to stand with these leaders, our healthcare experts, our medical providers who serve in Congress today, the Republicans in the Docs Caucus, who know how crucial it is to pass this bill. House Republicans will continue to fight for the American people to deliver on the goals we committed to in our commitment to America, including a nation that's safe. To do that, we must secure our borders and work to get the scourge of fentanyl out of our communities. And it's my honor to pass it along to one of the co-chairs of the Republican Docs Caucus, Dr. Burgess from Texas.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chair Stefanik. Thank you to the leader for being here, and thanks to other members of the Doctors Caucus. Look, this is what you get when you turn control of the southern border over to the cartels. Fentanyl is pouring into this country. It is unnecessary, and there is not a person here among us who has not sat at a round table or a meeting with a family member who has lost a loved one to a fentanyl poisoning. Not an overdose, but an intentional act of terror brought to us courtesy of the cartels on the southern border. Look, I represent a district in North Texas. Carrollton, Texas, the school district there was devastated by fentanyl making an incursion into the school district. Many people were sickened, and 3 persons unfortunately did not recover. Look, it was just 5 years ago that Congress passed the Support Act. The Support Act was to deal with the increase in opiate or diversion deaths that were occurring from otherwise legitimately prescribed opiates. It has changed. It is a different disease today. Fentanyl is an intentional act. The precursors are brought in by the People's Republic of China. They're delivered into Mexico, and then they are manufactured into pills and taken to our communities. This is why the one pill can kill issue is so terribly important. A kid taking a Xanax, a kid taking what they think is an Adderall, may very well not survive that adventure because in fact it was fentanyl and it was lethal. Here to speak more on this is our co-chair, Brad Winstrup.
I want to thank all my colleagues for coming out and for all of you coming out to hear our message. You know, our goal is to acknowledge what is going on and make every attempt to fix the problem that is all across of America. You know, the House of Representatives is taking action. We have taken action on the border. We're going to take action on this particular problem. I can tell you that as a representative, as a soldier, and as a doctor, that I consider illicit fentanyl to be a weapon of mass destruction, a huge danger to America. You've heard the numbers. You've heard the analogy. If a plane dropped every day, would we just be sitting around doing nothing and not talking about it? Would the president be not talking about that? But that's what we have. And right now, between ages of 18 to 45, it is the #1 cause of death. It is so destructive, these overdoses, and most of it illicit fentanyl. Fentanyl has its place in medicine, but not the illicit fentanyl. You know, we've made border trips. We went as a doctor's caucus down to the border to evaluate what was going on as far as the health security to the United States of America. And it wasn't just drugs either. It was seeing people come across when we're in the middle of a pandemic, no testing for COVID, making a lot of mistakes. I've gone down to the border with the Intelligence Committee to look at the national security risk that we face, and there are many. This is a cancer on America. You know, we've got to remove this cancer and get it off of our streets and out of our families. And we've got to stop things at the border or even before. I met with the Chinese ambassador several months ago. And he said, we don't like being blamed for the fentanyl issue in the United States. And I explained to him that I had been in China about 8 years ago when they were sending fentanyl directly to people's homes and asked them to stop it. In 2019, they did put a ban on that. He said, well, we're just selling a legal product, the precursors. We send that to other places too. And I said, well, that's fine. I'll tell you what, we'll work with you on that. We'll work with you on tracking where you're sending these precursors. We'll work with the Mexican government as well, if that's what it takes. He didn't want to go there. And here we have this situation. So I'm reintroducing this week something I introduced on the last term. It's the SOS Act, Save Our Scourge Act, which makes illicit fentanyl a weapon of mass destruction. And it will address the precursors coming from China going to the cartels. It will work with Mexican military and their counter-drug agencies. It will assess trafficking and see what we can do as a government in the United States of America, both federal and state, to try and address these issues. The Department of Homeland Security uses the definition that we use in this bill for a weapon of mass destruction. It's a weapon that can kill or injure many people simply through dissemination. No one can argue that that is what fentanyl is doing. That is exactly what it is doing. Right now on this bill, unfortunately, you don't have any Democrats. Hope to try and get some Democrats on this bill. Look, this is an American issue. This is an issue that should be uniting all of America across the board because every family in America knows somebody or has someone in their family that's been affected. This is not Republican or Democrat. This problem does not discriminate on one party or another or one ethnic group or another. This is an American problem that we hope to solve. And if the American people help speak up with us, maybe we'll get some action from those that aren't paying attention to it here in the government. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to Dr. Murphy.
Thank you guys for coming this afternoon. I want to thank my co-chairs, and I want to thank Representative Stefanik and Scalise for coming out and supporting us today. You know, this administration has had many self-inflicted crises. The crime wave, our inflation, but now, in my opinion, the opioid epidemic is our nation's greatest domestic threat. We've heard that 110,000 Americans died last year. There's no demographic. It's not white, it's not black, it's not rich, it's not poor, it's not north, it's not south. I would submit that one of you today in this crowd has either known or knows somebody who's died from an overdose of fentanyl. I've known 9 young men with whom my kids went to church, went to school, did scouts, who have died from an overdose. It is an absolute national tragedy. You know, the journey began 30, 40 years ago with the overprescribing of OxyContin. It started then. That was an absolute legal drug. But we got hold of that. We curtailed overprescribing in the United States, only sadly enough to be supplanted with illicit fentanyl. Illicit fentanyl, while it is something that kills, we do have to recognize that fentanyl is used legally. It's used legally in medicine, and we can't detract from that. It's a very, very good drug. But it's the changes that are put forth with the base products that come from China, which kill Americans. Just for an example, guys, I want you to understand a gram weighs about the size of a small paperclip. So 2 milligrams, 2/1000th of a gram, is a lethal dose of fentanyl. Imagine that. Just think about that difference in the weight and what can kill an American. The DEA noted that they seized over 400 million doses last year. So how do we stop this? How do we stop this absolute scourge on America? China has declared war on the United States. China is killing Americans on the street today. And the fact that they are complicit with this is not deniable. Precursors are coming from China. It doesn't matter what the Communist Party says they're doing. They are allowing these to come in and kill Americans every day. What happens then? Through the southern border, through other ports of entry, our drug cartels are feeding this poison onto the American streets. So with the initiatives put forth by Republicans, sadly Republicans, to try to beat this scourge, number one, we need to close our southern border. We've all been to the border. We've seen the pack mules, the kids carrying fentanyl in their backpacks when their parents have been ransomed. If they don't come back, they kill their parents. We know that's happening. Second, we have to put those in prison who are distributing fentanyl because it is absolute murder. Enough of the soft on crime prosecutors and DAs in this country. And lastly, China needs to be held accountable. They're trying to destroy this nation from within, and we simply cannot allow it. I'm thankful for my Republican colleagues for standing behind the initiatives and legislation that we're putting forth to hold these 3 groups accountable so that we can end the scourge on this country. Thank you, and I guess we'll yield back for questions, as it were, or how we want to do it, guys.
Did you want to say something? Did you have something? You want to speak?
Raise the mic.
Thank you. Representative Miller Meeks from Iowa and also a member of the DOC caucus. As one of the newer members of Congress, I would say what surprises me most, it's astonishing to me that this is not a bipartisan issue. The opioid crisis was an issue that both parties came to work together on, put forth policies, put forth prescription drug monitoring programs, other things to address overprescribing, to address pain management. But on this issue, because I suppose it's coming across an open southern border, there is not bipartisan support. Each of us come from states who had to address drug issues, whether it was synthetic marijuana in Iowa and all of its analogs, bath salts. Never thought I would be addressing something like bath salts when I was the director of a Department of Public Health. On this issue, on fentanyl, synthetic fentanyl, we should be addressing this issue bipartisan because it is a poison that is poisoning the youngest, 6 months old, all the way up to the oldest. We should work in a bipartisan fashion in order to address this, and I would encourage you, because as you've heard, you all know someone who has died of fentanyl poisoning. I would encourage you to ask representatives from every district, from every persuasion, to support the Halt Fentanyl Act so we can get a handle on the opioid crisis. Thank you.
Thanks. Good afternoon. You know, as an anesthesiologist, I've administered fentanyl and its derivatives to hundreds of patients. Fentanyl, sufentanil, alfentanil, remifentanil. It turns out you can do a lot with that molecule. And believe me, the cartels would. Right now, President Trump instituted a policy where any derivative of fentanyl, and it's a complex molecule, if you change one chemical in that molecule, it's a new molecule, and under the old rules, the DEA couldn't enforce the schedule. This bill is very simple. It says any change to fentanyl yields a drug that is on the schedule and gives law enforcement the ability to stop the scourge of fentanyl and its derivatives. Right now, fentanyl is the problem, but if we don't pass this law, it will be a derivative of fentanyl that will be totally legal to bring into the country. We have to do this. Again, this is whack-a-mole. The cartels, if we name the molecule, the cartels will adjust it a little bit and import one that's not listed. So this solves the problem. Now, next year's an election year. The current rules expire. We should be ahead of this. We should pass this bill now and make sure that neither fentanyl nor any of the derivatives continue to poison our American youth. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm John Joyce from Pennsylvania's 13th Congressional District. I want to put some faces to this Halt Fentanyl Act. Parents came to me just a few months ago. Their son, a college student at Shippensburg University in my district, had gone out with a bunch of buddies. They purchased cocaine that was laced with fentanyl. Their son was poisoned and died. Deb and Ray Cullen will be with us in the gallery on Thursday. They have followed along with the Halt Fentanyl Act. They have the understanding that their son was poisoned, and they've asked, what is Congress doing? Finally, Republicans and all sides of the aisle, both sides of the aisle, should be able to work together and pass this important piece of legislation to stop the poisoning of our children, our friends, and our neighbors. So come back on Thursday. I want you to talk to Deb and Ray Cullen. I want them to tell their story to you, to understand the numbers that we've put on this. Almost 3,000 a day. Over 100,000 last year alone have died from fentanyl poisoning. And Republicans in the United States House of Representatives will stand up and vote this Thursday on the Halt Fentanyl Act. I welcome you to meet Deb and Ray Cullen when they're here as we pass this important piece of legislation. Thank you.
Yeah, let me talk a little bit about the differences. So again, fentanyl molecule, synthetic molecule, invented about 40 years ago. Tremendous advances in medicine when it's used legally. Tremendous. And off of that molecule, several other molecules, legal molecules, remifentanil, sufentanil, alfentanil, they've all been licensed and legal. But that just means that that molecule, again, small changes in the original fentanyl molecule makes it just as deadly in terms of you stopping breathing, which is how you die from fentanyl overdose. What this legislation does, again, is to say that any derivative of fentanyl is treated as a Schedule I drug, which means it's illegal and the penalties are enhanced. That's what we need. We need the enhanced penalties.
Regarding sanctions, we put together a select committee on China that's looking into a lot of threats that China poses, specifically the CCP. And Chairman Gallagher, if you look at the hearings that they've had a number of hearings, very bipartisan. Both Republicans and Democrats on that committee have been very serious about looking at not just the military threats, but the threats that are here domestically that are posing serious problems to our country, fentanyl being one of those. Tomorrow, they're going to come out with their first report. It's a list of recommendations that standing committees will look into in terms of looking at legislation. They're not an authorizing committee, so the select committee will make recommendations. This is just the first round of recommendations they're going to be making tomorrow. I'm not sure if anything specifically on fentanyl will be part of that, but clearly the threat that fentanyl poses as it comes into our country through Mexico, but from China, will be one of the things that they're looking into.
I know you're saying that the bill is likely to get bipartisan support. A handful of Democrats have also said they're interested in supporting it. Can you speak to why there's no Democratic co-sponsors and what was your outreach like getting them there?
So the bill came through the Energy and Commerce Committee. I can't tell you why no Democrat was a co-sponsor. I will tell you from in the Rules Committee last night, the Statement of Administration Policy was brought to the Rules Committee. You've got to figure, well, that's going to be a veto threat from the president. It wasn't. He basically talked about some things about how bad the problem was, but he did not issue a veto threat. Because of the absence of a veto threat and some of the language I heard on the floor during the Rules debate, I would expect there will be a pretty significant bipartisan vote on this bill when it comes to the floor on Thursday. Obviously, we'll have to wait and see, but I'd be optimistic that whatever objections people think they may have had will begin to melt away when faced with the very harsh reality of what this problem represents.
Yeah, because Brent, you talked about other bills as well.
Well, I mean, I did talk about the Stop Our Scourge Act, declaring fentanyl a weapon of mass destruction. And I think you're asking more about what do we do for those that are addicted. And, you know, we are always and have been for several years, going back to when we had the opioid crisis with OxyContin, is, you know, how we get people through rehab. Look, I've always addressed the issue that we faced, besides the prescriptions that were not necessarily appropriate in hindsight and what had happened with prescribing. We always had the problem with drugs coming across our border. And I've always contended that this is a problem that we have from border to work. And so we have to stop things coming across the border. That's number one. And then number two, we have to prevent people from ever starting as best we possibly can and handle those that are actually distributing these drugs into our country and make sure that they get jail time and that they're not back out there just doing this again and again and again. And then, you know, when we get people into rehab, they have to have somewhere to go afterwards. And so we have to make sure that people that come out of rehab have an opportunity to regain society. Otherwise, very often they end up just back where they were. Right now, there's a lot of jobs out there. Let's cure people, let's get people into work so they have a sense of purpose besides just getting up and taking drugs every day.
And I'd just add that all of the parameters of the Support Act that was signed in October of 2018, those all still exist. So none of those have gone away. Now, quite likely the committee will work on reauthorization of the next phase of the Support Act later on in the year. But this is not the end of the story, but this is a necessary step for us to take right now to begin to get on top of this problem. That is the reason that they will give, but there is nothing in the legislation upon which we will be voting on Thursday that deals that increases or even talks about mandatory minimums. This is a fantasy that has been created by the other side, and quite honestly, the problem is so severe, I frankly don't understand why they've created this diversion.
Thank you all.
All right.